Are carbs the enemy for those over 40? Let's just find out. Hey, I'm Mike.
And I'm Twain.
Welcome to another episode of 40 Plus Fit, the podcast where we unpack the science of sustainable weight loss and fitness for those over 40. Awesome. Today, we're going to look at a fantastic subject that I know most people over 40 have had at least one or two conversations about. And this is the evil one, the evil subject of carbs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I believe the protein one should be out already by the time you're listening to this one. So that was last week's one. And everybody knows protein's great, right? But carbs is bad, especially for weight loss.
Yes. So whenever anybody needs to lose weight, the first thing that goes out the window is carbs.
Yeah, that's
You
what
always hear, I can't eat white rice. I can't eat anything anymore because I want to lose 2 kilos. And so I stick to the protein and the vegetables.
that's very sad, isn't it? When you can't eat certain things, it just feels really sad.
I know.
What's your experience with it, Mike?
Usually if I have to cut out carbs, there's usually a bout of depression that follows. Because carbs are just your happy macro, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of the most popular macros in that sense. Just because a lot of things that we look at and we enjoy tend to be potentially carb heavy. But I think that's also in and of itself a little bit of a misconception as well, because most of the nice stuff that we like to eat aren't usually just carbs. They're usually a combination of carbs plus fats, plus having like salt in them, and plus also having good texture to them. So this is more about the food science component of things. Like you can name me pretty much any interesting or nice thing that people like to eat, like donuts, right? Donuts are pretty much just fried dough. They glaze with sugar. So that's carbs and fats in there, right? You can, what else is there? Cakes, ice cream, pizza. All these are basically just carbs and fats.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be focusing on carbs because that's the one thing that I think a lot of people seem to be, uh, you know, having a lot of misconceptions about.
Yeah. So we'll focus on carbs today, but I think in the future we'll do one on fats as well, because I think there are a couple of misconceptions as to how fats really play a part in a
Mm,
fat loss journey as well.
yeah, for sure.
But when it comes to like carbs, like one of mine is noodles and pastas, those are like my go-tos. But it's fair enough, as you point out, the pasta comes with the sauce and it comes with all that other stuff, and those are usually constituted under the fat macro, not so much the carbs.
Yeah, it's a combination. It's a
Yeah,
combination. No one really eats like carbs alone unless you're just like
eat
munching
white
on
rice.
something, right? Yeah, I mean, if you just eat only white rice, but then you got to eat that with something,
Yeah,
you know,
and nobody
like
eats
like
just
this.
plain white rice, right? Well,
Yeah,
no sane
yeah,
person eats just plain white rice with nothing else.
yeah. And I mean, even you take the traditional, typical Asian simple meal, right? Like I used to make this all the time when I was a kid, which is basically just white rice and then fry a couple eggs. The
Mm.
eggs are going to have some fat in there as well, right? Like the whole thing just tastes great,
But the
you know?
eggs add the flavor, though.
Yeah, and they add the flavor
Yeah,
because yeah, the fat itself essentially
yeah.
adds a flavor. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about carbs. What are we going to start with?
Well, I think we've touched on a few things there, and I think it's a good segue into moving. We touched on white rice. We touched on a few other types. Maybe we can look at what are the different types of carbohydrates when we start there, because
Okay.
carbohydrates is not just one. Well, I was going to say one simple subject, but that's probably giving away a bit of the carbs categories here. So it doesn't all fall under one category, but it splits into a couple. Perhaps you can just enlighten us a little bit as to the different types of carbs and their functions in the body.
Yeah, I think um, in general, carbs are usually divided into two categories. One is people like to call simple carbs, and the other one's complex carbs. Um, Basically, simple carbs is any form of sugar, um, and complex carbs just are other varieties of carbs which are not in their smallest form or sugar unit. Okay, so a simple example would be simple carbs will essentially just be like sugar, table sugar, right? You have that, you have sweets for things like this, gummies, whatever. And then you have complex carbs, which are mainly all your grains, anything that's like whole wheat bread, things like this. Even something like like white bread. White bread, sometimes people will say, oh, that's as bad as sugar. But in essence, it doesn't digest the same way as actual table sugar does. So, there seems to be it's more of a spectrum rather than a pure division of simple versus complex. Yeah. So I think the main thing I wanted to illustrate here is just that, look, carbs have so many, like down to the chemical level, there's or the molecular level, there's like longer chain carbs versus shorter chain carbs. So simple, complex versus simple. And it goes across the spectrum because there are a few different types and configurations to those chains. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the easiest way to kind of break it down. The question then becomes like, are some worse for us than others, right? And the truth is this: at the end of the day, carbs serve only one role, and that's energy production. Like for quick energy, it's one of the easiest for bodies to break down quickly and to use it for quick energy. And our brain, our brain is one of the biggest consumers of energy in our body. In fact, the brain's like about what 40%, almost 25 to 30% of our daily metabolic like consumption. So that our brain really uses up a ton of energy. I mean, it makes sense, right? Because it controls the rest of the body, sends signals everywhere. It's
Yeah.
kind of regulating the body all the time. And so, carbs serve as a really quick, fast, easy energy source for that purpose. It also serves as a quick energy source for muscles, when we have to do anything that's intense, lifting weights, just even running for the bus. All these things will require some carbs. So carbs is really the main energy unit that our body likes to use and preferentially uses. Although, it does use fats at different times as well. Yeah. So that's probably it in a nutshell. Did I miss anything?
I think you got most of it, but I think for me, is the other element that comes with a lot of carbs that people seem to neglect and forget about is the element of fiber that you can get from a large amount of carbs. I mean, I'm not saying it's every carb that is going to provide, but like fruits and vegetables is also carbs, right?
Yes, yes, definitely. Oh yeah, and actually I think I missed out that whole chunk, which is basically the fiber component to carbs. So under the complex carbs, you have stuff like vegetables, which are considered non-starchy, and they don't yield a lot of energy. So basically, if you eat like anything from white bread to whole wheat bread to rice to whole grains, whatever it is, all of these things will yield a significant amount of energy, give you some energy, right? And we talked about carbs being the main energy source for our body for almost all things that it needs to do. And there's this subcategory of fruits and veg. Fruits will also have some sugars in them, so they're actually great sources of energy as well. But vegetables, particularly, they have a lot more fiber in them. Okay, and fiber does fall under kind of like it's not a carb. Fiber is its own macronutrient. But vegetables generally fall under the carbohydrate category, but they're just filled with a lot of fiber and very, very, very little like sugars. And you can't see me, but I'm putting that in inverted commas. Yeah, but sugars because they yield some energy, okay, but primarily the energy yield in vegetables are just so negligible. Yeah, so that's kind of yeah, fibers are really important as well. We probably should do a whole episode on fiber as well at some point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
but
think it
today
sounds
we're
good.
talking about
I
carbs,
mean,
and it's yeah, and
yeah,
it's
since the target audience is people over 40, I think fiber becomes quite an important component for as you age.
for sure, and not
Speaking
even
as
as
somebody who's over 40.
yeah. Yeah, and the habit has to start when you're young. So this is why we have to get all the children, if you have children, make sure they eat their vegetables, make sure you get them to the habit of including the vegetables in the diet so they don't have to learn it again when they are older. You'd be surprised
Yes.
how many clients I talk to who are like, I know I should eat vegetables, but I don't like it, I don't eat it. Don't you have kids? Do you allow your kids to not eat their vegetables? And they say, why are you doing the same thing for yourself?
Yeah. Well, it's the rules for thee, but not for me, right?
Hmm.
So when you look at
So
these carbs like this, right? What about now when we look at it from the fitness perspective? Like, how does carbs play a part, like in the different types of exercise that I need to go and do? Is it like because you're touching on the point that it's our main energy source.
mhm.
So how does that actually all come into play? If
Yeah.
let's say I'm hitting the gym 2 to 3 times a week. How's carbs now coming into play for this?
Okay. The the direct answer is that carbs will impact the level of your performance in your workouts, especially if you're trying to push really hard in your workouts. Okay. And if you don't have enough energy readily available, floating around in your bloodstream, it's very difficult for you to actually perform well. So if you're trying to go low carb and you're trying to lift heavy weights and go for like longer durations in the gym of exercising, lifting weights, or doing cardio, you'll find that you'll have that little drop off in energy really, really quickly. All right, so that impacts the performance. On the other end of the spectrum, after you exercise, you need to recover. And if you don't have enough carbs coming into the body, it actually impacts the recovery system of the body as well, because your body does need energy again to facilitate the recovery process. Okay, so if you're over 40, just remember that our recovery system isn't as robust as it is when we're younger. Right? We covered this in earlier
Mm.
episodes. We talk about kind of aging and the aging process,
Yeah.
right? But again, our recovery system is not as robust. So having enough carbs is also vital to kind of help us, facilitate that recovery and kind of maximize it. So that's one thing. Carbs are one of those things where it can actually be stored in the body. So, the main reason why we always focus on telling people, hey, build as much muscle as you can is because muscle acts as a storage device for carbs, a little bit of fats as well, but mainly carbs. And it's stored in the muscle as muscle glycogen. And so even if you don't eat any carbs, let's say for 1 or 2 or 3 days, you still have all these leftover carbs in the body that can be used to sustain your continuous activity. It also gets stored in the liver as liver glycogen as well, but that's usually kind of used towards evening at night, because at night when you do need some energy for the brain, to continue its functions of repair, recovery, and all, you're not moving your muscles, right? So if you're not moving your muscles, you're not kind of like triggering those glycogen stores, so it actually pulls it out from the liver. So that's kind of how it impacts our overall recovery and the workouts directly. But the main reason why I say that's the direct way is because it's a spectrum, right?
Mm.
And kind of depends also how intense are you actually working out. And when I say intense, I mean not so much relative to your own benchmark, but there's certain like threshold points of intensity. Without getting too technical about it, but there's certain threshold points of intensity where you just don't really need a ton of carbs. So and why I'm saying this is because I get this. I don't want people to misconstrue the message as like, oh, I'm going to go and exercise now, and so I need a lot of carbs. So I need to go and like carbo load or something. Some people go to extreme, right? So I eat
Yeah.
like one big pasta meal or something, and then you go to the gym and you maybe do like half an hour of just lifting some light weights, not really pushing yourself. So there is a certain level of intensity that would necessitate, yes, you need a lot of carbs to kind of push that and make sure the performance is there. Um, and so I just want to put that out there, to say like, okay, if you're going to the gym right now and you're only doing like 2 to 3 times, you're like beginner just starting out, you probably don't need a lot of carbs for your workouts. As they get more intense, as you do maybe a lot more work, maybe a combination of a lot of cardio, you're starting to run like 5 kilometers a day, right? We always use that, right?
Yes.
We use your 5 kilometers a day. So let's say we start to run like 5 kilometers a day, we're trying to bring our step count up to like 10,000, 15,000, maybe something like this. And then you're doing like exercise with weights maybe 4 times, 5 times a week, for 45 minutes, intense, heavy, intense, really pushing your limits kind of thing. Okay, then you really start to need a lot more carbs in your system. Yeah, so I just want to put it out there. There's a kind of a sliding scale that correlates with your intensity levels. There's no need to know what an exact prescription is. What you can do is you can do a quick like self-test and experiment. Try, let's say, like maybe having just one banana before your workouts, and then go into your workouts and say, okay, how do I feel? And you find that, hey, actually I can finish what I need to do with my workouts, then that one banana is enough. You don't need more than that already. Yeah, so that's a very quick experiment. If you find that you start to drop off very, very readily in your workouts, okay, maybe you need more than that one banana. Then you have a little bit more. Maybe you have two bananas, or the equivalent of two bananas. And then that's kind of how you find out your individual preference, right? And what your body does best with.
Hmm. Is there a difference from where the body will burn the calorie or the energy from depending on the exercise. Like if I go running 5 kilometers or if
Yeah.
I go walking 3 kilometers, does the body burn from the same place or does it burn from different places?
Oh, that's a great question. I think this is something that a lot of people also have like misconceptions about. And we probably will talk about this more in like the fat loss, fat burning the episode where we talk about fats, because I think that's something that people conflate together.
Mm,
But just briefly talk about this. Your energy systems in the body are always being utilized. So think of it this way: there's like your creatine phosphate system, so the actual creatine stores in the body. There's that. So think of that as like one energy system. The next energy system is your carbs, right? And then there's another energy system here where it's like the fats, right? And all of these three are always providing energy to the body, just in varying levels. So when you do something more intense, your carb levels and your creatine levels will shoot up. Not sorry, not their levels will shoot up, but like the pooling of energy will come from there, majority. And then your fat, the fat stores and the fat energy will not be as utilized. So you'll go down, pretty low. There will still be a little bit contributing, but it's not a ton. And so when you do something low intensity, the fat energy utilization actually becomes a lot higher. And then your carb and your creatine phosphate systems start to go down. They're much lower. So it's kind of depending on the intensity of the activity, your body transitions through these energy utilization cycles. So that's kind of how it works. So you're kind of using all these components always. It's just to what degree depending on the activity you're doing. So right now we're sitting here, we're talking, we are recording this podcast. We are probably just burning a lot of fat.
mm,
We're burning more fat than we are carbs because we're not doing anything really physical or intense. If
right.
you were to go out for a walk later, if it's just a brisk walk, the chances are we're not using very much carbs at all. Maybe just a little bit more than if you were just sitting still, but we'll still be using primarily a lot of fats just because walking is not very intense for us. Yeah. But let's say if I were to start going to the gym, I'll start to lift weights, even just straining the muscles against that. Okay, that's starting to become really intense. That's where we start to pull out a lot more of the carbs in.
Okay. So if you're looking at like the concept of NEAT, right? The non-exercise activity thermogenesis, where is that one actually pulling from? Does it also depend on whatever exercise, whatever activity that you're doing? Like if you're doing a bit more strenuous activity, like let's say you're moving a couch or whatever, that one's going to pull more from carbs, your carb stores. Whilst if you're walking around the mall, that one's going to pull more from fat stores. I mean, just looking at practical examples.
Yeah, yeah. Those are exactly, like we could get into the details of need and classification as well, but that's pretty much the how it works. Yeah,
Okay. Oh,
yeah.
interesting. So I think, I mean, sorry, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say because technically NEAT is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's
Mm,
actually it tends to be a lot of the stuff where now we understand it as like, okay, all the things that are not exercise related. That means I'm not intentionally going to exercise, right? So you mentioned moving the couch, or moving stuff, or the walking around the mall and things like this. Um, Technically, the actual scientific definition of NEAT is more related to things that our body does to help either burn a bit more energy or burn less energy. So it's stuff like fidgeting, we fidget less. We have less propensity to go and move. These are all like what falls underneath. So it gets a bit more technical there. But I mean, for the gist, the main message I think that you just elaborated there was good enough, and actually that's the most practical definition of it, really, without getting too in the weeds.
Okay. I think it's probably a good time then to move on to what a lot of people are probably listening for.
Yep.
And that is like, okay, so what is carbs and how does this play a part for weight loss? Because the general consensus is that carbs is the one that makes you fat, right? You speak to
Hmm.
anybody,
Yeah.
almost anybody, let's qualify that. Almost anybody will tell you is like the first thing that goes out the window whenever I want to lose weight is I don't eat white rice anymore, or I don't eat whatever carbs it is in that
Yeah.
culture. But that is generally the first one that gets thrown out the window.
Yeah.
So what would you say about this to people that are saying carbs make you fat?
Yeah. I'll ask them by which mechanism would would they be referring to, carbs making them fat?
Hmm.
Because most of the time people will say, hey, I eat a bit of carbs and then my weight goes up. And that's the correlation that they make between, oh, I eat carbs means I gain weight means I get fat. But here's like kind of the breakdown of it, right? If you eat more carbs, carbs are very water retentive, right? They are hydrophilic. They will 1 gram of carbs will absorb about 3 grams of water.
Oh, so
So
much.
yeah. So that's why we do. That's why like for us, and that's why there's weight class sports, and we do all this like water cutting stuff
Hmm.
to use weight. And one of the parts of the process, oftentimes, is what we call a gut cut, and then closer towards the weigh in, we cut out like some carbs just so we can drop some water really quickly. And this is also one of the main reasons why when people do keto, they think it's so effective at the start because they drop so much weight, but they're actually just dropping a ton of water because they drop out carbs, right? So I think this is where that myth already kind of comes in. And so you can kind of see where I'm going here with this because, again, the myth is that carbs make you fat, but carbs themselves, by their nature, don't actually make you fat.
Hmm.
You know, it's usually just that, number one, a lot of the foods that people tend to eat in large quantities, without even knowing it, right? Like it's easy to overeat, tend to be primarily, seen as carbs when they're actually not. So I give you example, potato chips. Name me a person who can stop at one with a Pringle. Name me a person who can stop at just one.
If I can name that person, all you're going to reply is, and that person is a liar.
Yes,
How to
yes.
identify a liar.
How to identify a liar, right? Yeah, so exactly like potato chips, right? Potato chips is salty, has tons of carbs in it, tons of fats in it, evenly mixed. In fact, I think it probably has more fats in terms of calories from fats than it does from carbs. Or they're at least very evenly balanced, depending on the type of potato chip. But because of that, they're so easy to eat, you can eat a whole bag and still feel like you haven't really eaten. But then if you ate a whole bag, like a standard bag, you probably ate like what, 500 calories already.
Yeah, it's
You
like
know?
a 5K run already.
Yeah, so you put in a ton of energy into you that needs to go somewhere. And if
Yep.
if you don't burn that off in terms of your body burning needs, right? And combined with activity and exercise and all, it needs to get stored. And so that is what primarily pushes that fat gain process. Okay, we've obviously talked about this before, where it's really like total calorie intake that kind of dictates whether you gain or you lose weight.
Yeah.
I think best reminder here. So then, how does carbs actually kind of play into it? Then, if you actually look at it, some of the leanest and the slimmest, populations are like the Japanese, right? You look at the Japanese, especially in those older regions, where all they do is like they walk around everywhere, they eat tons of white rice. They actually don't eat that much protein, but they stay really active. They're very slim, very healthy, very good body composition, and they eat tons and tons of carbs. Like that forms a cornerstone of a large part of their cuisine. And so the answer here is really like it's not about the carbs making you fat. Okay. And if your correlation is I eat carbs, my weight goes up, means I'm gaining weight, getting fat, then you know right now that that correlation is not causation. Right? We know the mechanism by which it is giving you the illusion that you're gaining weight, right? Because it's just water retention, it's just fluid differences. So you want to focus then when you're talking about carbs, when you want to focus then on like what type of carbs are you actually taking in?
Yeah.
What are the carbs that form the bulk of your diet? Obviously, don't get the type of carbs that are mixed in with a lot of fats. And that's a large portion of like local cuisine. You go to the hawker center, you're going to get chicken rice, right? Chicken rice is all mixed in, all the fats.
Guilty
Uh,
as charged.
fried noodles, any kind of like even soup noodles sometimes as well, with those really rich broths. All these things are just tons and tons of like, fat together with the carbs. So either, and our recommendation is, try to focus on getting as many of these like carbs in their more um standard form, without all these mixtures or too much sauce and stuff. Because then that will help you keep the calories lower and allow you to still get in the correct like amount of energy that you might need, especially if you're really active. Or the even easier alternative is to just focus on portion control, right? And eating mindfully. Because look, if you're going to go to the hawker center, like, and that's part and parcel of your daily routine, you can still make a good choice there, You can eat the fried noodles that you want, but maybe just have half a portion instead of the full plate, right? You ask the auntie, say, hey, auntie, give me just half a plate. Can also charge me a bit less. I'm not taking that much. You'll be like, I'm sure she'll be, reasonable with it. And then maybe you take a couple of like protein options, whatever it is. And then you're eating lesser, but you're still kind of having the best of both worlds. So it's really about just controlling those portions. But if you're making your own food, I definitely would recommend, hey, focus on the whole grains, focus on the fruits, focus on the vegetables, because that's really going to be the thing that will really help keep you healthier in the long run, the quality of the food that you eat, more than just like the weight loss in and of itself. Yeah.
Just to touch on the portion control that you were saying,
Yes.
is portion control doesn't have to be limited to the meal itself. It could have been like, you're going to eat at the hawker store for lunch, so maybe you cut your breakfast a little bit.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, exactly. Like if you know roughly in a day how much you're eating, you can kind of manipulate the meals accordingly and be like, okay, if I have this big, like you said, if I know I'm going to go to a hawker center and I want to eat this full thing, right? I want to eat this full plate of char kway teow. Okay, what do I need to do at the other meals to kind of accommodate that so I can keep
Mm.
my overall calorie intake relatively low? And that's really the crux of it. You can, and the best way to do this is honestly just come up with a plan of like, what are the usual foods that you would eat, about 70, 80% of the time. And then let the other 20% of the time be, to 30% of the time be, okay, all these other things that I might want to be flexible with. For that week, I might feel like eating this particular dish, or I may feel like eating Mexican this week, or I might feel like eating Japanese next week, something like this, right?
Yeah.
And then you just select those days where you're going to indulge, and then the rest of the days you just kind of go about your normal business. So you still have a large majority of the time where you're eating very well, you're keeping the calories relatively low, and you're getting good quality foods in there, a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, a lot of protein. And then at those meals where you have already earmarked them for when you want to enjoy them, you go ahead and you can enjoy them fully. Because you already know you did the work to allow for them to be part of your plan. So that's
Mm.
really one of the, I would say, like portion control. It's the basic umbrella upon which we're talking about, but like there's so many ways to kind of like skin this cat.
Yeah, I mean, that's why you have all the different kinds of diets, right? At the end of the day, it's still calories
Yeah,
in, calories out. It's just what's the
yeah,
process and the way that you do it.
exactly. Yeah.
All right, so we touched on this slightly. Let's go a bit more specific. So if
Okay.
I have to look at different kinds of goals, right? Let's say
Mm.
my goal is primarily weight loss. Uh,
Okay.
so how can I actually structure, and what carbs should I be focusing on for that particular goal in mind?
Yeah. If your goal is mainly weight loss, I'm also going to assume that you are trying to exercise as well. Okay. If you're trying to exercise, you definitely need a certain level of carbs in your system. Most people can get away with actually not having that much. Again, even like some of the most intense people that doing the most intense workouts can actually kind of get away with not a ton of carbs in their diet if they're trying to cut weight. So what I recommend is this. You probably want to replace as much of your carbs and with as much vegetables as you can. Because the vegetables themselves, number one, they're going to be giving you a lot more fiber. They're also going to be helping you to stay fuller for longer. So they actually kind of help with the hunger component of things. And that's probably what I would recommend first. So getting at least, 3 to 4 servings of vegetables a day minimum will really help with that. In terms of the carb components, I would probably just first build out how much protein you actually need. And again, you can listen to our protein episode on that to figure out exactly how much what you would need. And then after you have that down, then you will know, okay, what's the balance of the calories that I have left? And from that balance of calories, I would then suggest, you figure out the fat component. Okay, how much fat do I need? And then you take that away from the calories, and you have finally left with the balance of calories, which would then be all dedicated to carbs. And so that's how how you kind of develop your own macro breakdown. If you want to put it simply, I would say maybe on average, what I've noticed for most people would be those that are starting out, let's just have one meal where you have like your regular serving of carbs. And the other 2 meals in a day, we drop it back down. For most people, that meal with which we have carbs in, we usually put that either directly after their workout or somewhere before their workout, depending on their preference. So for some, it might be, lunch and then they go and work out. For most people that are working regular jobs, it's probably in that dinner meal after their workout.
Okay.
Yeah. So for weight loss, that's probably where I would start. So substitute as much of the regular starchy carbs as you can with vegetables first. And then, only have that 1 meal a day where you're having some carbs. That's around where your workout is. So you're eating kind of towards your activity levels and what your body, to sustain some performance while keeping all your calories low.
Would you have any specific veggies that you would recommend, or is it like across board, as long as you just take in vegetables is okay?
I think if you like across board, the general recommendation is yes, let's take in as many vegetables as you can. But I think on an individual basis, everybody would have like certain vegetables that maybe they eat and it doesn't sit well in the stomach. So I give you an example, like a large portion of my clients that are Asian, they don't seem to take broccoli really well.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
So it's like we really got to make sure the broccoli is cooked down as much as possible, like thoroughly cooked, and then they can digest it better. So there's certain vegetables that it might not sit well with you, and if they don't sit well with you, you probably want to kind of remove them. Now, there's this list called the FODMAP list, and basically it divides foods into those where there's certain fibers that kind of ferment in certain fiber alcohols that kind of ferment in the gut that kind of cause some discomfort, and then those that have like very low concentration of such fibers. And so this usually is something that we tackle with people that have like consistent, irritable bowel issues, that would be very useful. But if you're concerned with like what vegetables to take, probably you can download. You can just go on to online, search FODMAP, FODMAP, and search for a list, say FODMAP list of vegetables, and then you can see which ones are high, which ones are lower. Start with the lower option, and then play around with those vegetables. If they sit well, then you can slowly introduce in, some of those from the higher end of the list.
Okay. And it's probably also better to look at the cooking style of the vegetables as well, because like if you're going to be frying it, you're going to add the element of oil, which also adds the element of fat. So it increases your
Oh,
calories
for
and all that
sure.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's good to see what style or how you're actually cooking it.
A
Okay.
quick hack for that, if you don't particularly want to add too much oil, is you can just actually put the vegetables in the air fryer, and then if it's vegetables that you need to kind of stir fry and stuff, you probably can just use those oil sprays instead of
Mhm.
like actual, like one ladle of cooking oil or something.
Yeah, which that one ladle never turns to be one ladle, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's always,
like
yeah,
it
it's an
ends up
extra
being like
200,
two,
300
three.
calories or something. Just, yeah, without, and the worst part is it doesn't feel like it. You
Yeah,
don't,
that's the
it's
problem.
not essential.
That's the problem. Well, especially for me, that's the problem. Uh, okay, so weight loss, let's increase the amount of veggies and
Mhm.
then have maybe one and portion control, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so what about let's move into muscle building. Like I want to now be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger. What do I
Oh,
do? How is my carb intake now different from my weight loss one?
well, if it's muscle building, and I'm talking like you say, you want to be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger, you want to maximize the amount of muscle that you're building, you probably want to raise up your carb intake quite a bit. Again, it's dictated by the total calorie level. Okay. We still use the same formula. You're still going to go with like, okay, what's the total calories I need in a day to slowly gain weight? Because you cannot build muscle, any substantial amount of muscle if you are either eating um if you're not eating enough, or if you're eating like just enough to kind of sustain your body, because your body's not really going to build muscle that way. That's not its priority at that
Mm.
stage. So you need to give it a surplus of calories in order to be able to build. Okay, the surplus doesn't necessarily need to be really big. Maybe 100 200 calories extra is probably good enough as a starting point. And so what that means is that you would have your protein intake calculated, you have your fat intake calculated. It's the same as what you would have calculated initially. It's just that the balance of calories will be higher now. So you just add more carbs back in. Now, in terms of in terms of the carbs, you probably can get away with having a little bit more simpler carbs added back in this way. Just because if you're going to be training really hard, you will like if you're looking to gain muscle, you need to be training really hard, right? And because of the harder training, your sensitivity to some of these like simpler carbs will be a bit higher, and it'll be easier for you to assimilate them into the muscles, for the recovery purposes and all that good stuff.
Mm.
So you could get away with like a little bit more simpler carbs, even like some sweets post-workout or something like this. We usually recommend some sort of like, a sugary drink in like while you're working out, just so that it can help sustain your energy and kind of feed the muscles well. So that's probably the only change I will make. You might reduce the vegetable servings down a little bit, just because, if you need to eat more food and you're having a ton of vegetables in, it can make it very tough. It can
Yes.
make the stomach feel really full all. Okay. But that's like the only tweak you really make. It doesn't change the type of foods that you really eat, you just change the volume of it. So whereas let's say previously you would have that one meal, as I mentioned, as a starting point, that one meal with the carbs, you might have maybe two meals with the carbs, or then eventually three meals with the carbs, depending how much you're adding back.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is probably not too, well, should I say, one will come across quite a silly question, and then the other one is maybe not as silly. But is there a difference between liquid carbs and solid carbs that you're eating?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just the difference in how quickly they get broken down and assimilated. So that's the only difference. If you are a diabetic, type 1 diabetic, then obviously that's an issue for you. Like you don't want to raise your insulin levels too quickly,
Mhm.
because your body is not able to produce insulin to handle, right, that glucose loading. But otherwise, even if you're type 2 diabetic and you're gradually losing weight and stuff, and you're actually training, like if you're training with exercise, you don't actually have to worry too much about it. In fact, even for type 1 diabetics, what they do is right now they prescribe weight training, because the effects of weight training has a very remarkable thing where it helps to open up the cell gateway to pull in the nutrients when you lift weights, in the absence of insulin. So now it means that I can eat, these like maybe slightly higher sugary stuff, and if I'm training, my muscles will be able to absorb it without requiring insulin to come and help, which then reduces the insulin load requirement, which is the thing that makes type 1 diabetic stuff dangerous, because without the insulin, it cannot shuttle the nutrients. Obviously, the sugar stays in the blood for too long.
Oh, so what about sorry, just to hop on the previous one.
Oh, no, no, no worries. Yeah.
If we're taking liquid carbs and solid carbs, right? So if you're taking the weight loss diet plan that you were eating, so you're eating all the
Yes.
vegetables and everything, and you just add in like, I don't know, 4 bottles of Lucozade to increase your carb intake, will that
Uh-huh.
suffice, or is it actually more preferable that you take in solid carbs?
I I think in a vacuum, probably not much difference if you're eating the same amount of vegetables. The solid carbs option will probably still um have a difference where they won't digest as fast. So you have a little bit more of that sustained energy release, so to speak. But in the bigger picture, does it really impact everything if you're already getting so much fiber and getting all your vegetables in? Probably not.
Okay.
Probably not as much. But yeah, there are other vitamins and minerals that come from like solid carbs. Example, like getting some extra iron if you're getting enough whole wheat stuff in, and enough B12, things like this.
Hmm.
Uh, that you might be missing out on. So in the long run, potentially that could have some impact, I guess. But yeah, I don't think it really matters too much if you already have the entirety of the vegetable components covered.
Okay. And now for that might have been a silly question, but let's go for the even sillier. Um,
Okay.
if you're going into a calorie surplus, right?
Yes.
Does that allow you to build muscle, or do you still like definitely need the protein intake in order for the building, the synthesizing of muscle?
You need a certain level of protein intake for sure. But it's probably not as like what's the minimum you can get away with is probably pretty low or towards the lower end, just because if you're in a calorie surplus, your body's not in a hurry to like break down muscle tissue and things like this. Yeah. So if you're in a calorie surplus, you probably don't need a ton, like a really high protein intake. You can yeah, you can just get away with something slightly lower than you already calculated. Uh, Now in practice, I think that differs for everybody. For multiple reasons. There's a whole bunch of reasons that it could differ. But I think most of them come down to like just level of adherence, like how long can you stick with the type of diet you're doing, and how accurate you are with the amounts that you're actually taking in, all this kind of yeah, all this kind of like human error stuff, I would say.
Okay. Interesting. Because the general consensus is like you want to build muscle, you need to whack the protein.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I think that consensus would still have decent bearing, mainly because most people are under eating their protein. But if you happen to be a gym bro and you're consuming like tons and tons and tons of protein, like 2 grams per pound of body weight kind of deal,
Mm.
uh, then obviously that's going to be a bit excessive. And unless you really like it, you have like your whole system set up, it's a preference, then by all means go have at it. But is it necessary? Probably not.
Okay. And just for those that are listening, if you want to know more about the recommended daily amounts that you should be taking in for protein amounts, you can listen to I think it's our previous episode or the episode before that where we actually spoke about protein and we gave examples on depending on your activity level and your goals that you want to do, how much protein you should be taking in. And so with that, we'll move on to the final fitness goal, and that is like a person who just wants general fitness and just wants to ensure that they have good energy levels to go on with their daily lives. What would you recommend for these people?
Yeah, I would say that's actually really similar to the weight loss one, but with certain tweaks. So the first thing is general fitness tends to be relatively moderate intensity on aggregate. So you're not somebody that like will be training 6 days in the gym or something of that nature. So you probably, maybe 2 times, 3 times a week, that kind of deal. You probably do maybe 2 to 3 times a week of some sort of cardio, maybe a light jog, maybe a run here and there. So in terms of overall activity, you would the the principle would be you want to eat and provide your body enough energy for the amount of activity that you're doing, because we're just talking about general maintenance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the simplest practical direction I can give for this is if you are going to be running or doing weights that day, probably have maybe 1 meal worth of carbs for that day. Um, and then otherwise you would just like, leave out the carbs, keep your meals pretty lean the rest of the day. So that would just give you just enough energy to be able to continue up with your regular activity. And then the only difference from like the weight loss component is that you can probably get away with maybe a bit more, 3 to 4 more meals where you're indulging, you're eating out and stuff. And you find that to be a very nice balance. So you're kind of saving all the calories that you would otherwise have from, your regular carbs, in your breakfast, in your lunch, your dinner on those regular days, and you're saving those and pushing those over to the days where you would need to indulge a bit more. That way, it allows you to really have a very balanced kind of like lifestyle, in a very simple way. So I'm trying to make it super simple to kind of adhere to. Of course, if you're trying to lose weight, then you need to be a little bit more specific about, okay, how much exactly are you eating, if you really want to be getting the level of results that you want to get.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for general fitness, energy levels, most people can get away with just having probably like 1 to 2 portions of carbs a day, and their energy levels would likely not suffer very much.
Okay. And if you are more interested and you hear like what Twain is talking about here, and you want a specific plan for yourself, you can always get in contact with you guys at fitforlife.io, right?
Yeah, just drop us a message there. Depending if you're in Singapore and you want to do like an in-person trial, then you can definitely, we can definitely set you up for that. If you're just looking for like the online coaching support component, we can always do that as well.
Okay. So do give Twain a shout out if you're looking for a specific goal that they can help you and assist you to attain those goals. All right,
Yeah.
think we can probably look to wrap up. And I thought maybe we can wrap up with a bit of myth busting.
Oh, sure.
And carbs is such a great one to bust myths on because there's so many going around. But I think we'll just go with a few, like some that I've heard recently. One
Okay.
is obviously, I think we've touched on this a few times, but maybe you can just reinforce it again, is that all carbs are bad for weight loss.
Yeah. No, carbs are great. They give you energy to work out properly. And if you take the correct dosage of carbs, you'll be able to lose weight, no problem.
Okay. What about carbs make you feel sluggish?
Well, a lot of times, if you are taking in a huge amount of carbs and you are not doing anything after that, where you actually will utilize that huge dump of carbs coming in, then it's likely you will feel some kind of digestive, we call it postprandial somnolence, the super technical name for it, which basically just means a food coma. Yeah. Yeah. And you could experience that for sure. But I think that's more a function, not of the carbs themselves, but more of the fact that number one, you're probably not getting enough activity in. And number two, you might be your insulin sensitivity might not actually be very high. And that's obviously something else we can do a whole episode on. But basically that just means that your ability to clear the carbs from your system is not very good. And so that kind of causes a little bit of that sluggishness, the brain fog, because your body's redirecting resource to try to clear it up.
Okay. What about fruit is too high in sugar to be healthy?
Definitely not. This one's an easy one. Like, give me somebody who only eats fruit, and is fat.
That's true.
Yeah, it's fruit has tons of fiber in it, a good amount of water for a lot of fruits, a good amount of like vitamins, some minerals for certain fruits as well. So they're a great all-round thing aside from just having some natural sugars in them.
I suppose it depends on where you're getting your fruit from, right? Maybe you're getting it from those dried fruit packets that have
Yeah, that's
extra
not
sugar.
yeah. When we say fruits here, let's focus on like actual fruits that are not dried out and stuff and
Yeah.
concentrated. Yeah.
Okay, and then the final one, and I think this is just to wrap up because we need to reinforce it one last time,
Yep.
is I need to cut out all carbs completely if I want to lose weight.
Well, the entire episode, if you made it this far, you already know this one's not true, right? In the correct dosage, balanced off with the right amount of protein, the right amount of, vegetables as well, and a good amount of healthy fats in there, you can definitely eat your carbs in and lose weight very sustainably, I might add.
And I think that's the big point there is that oftentimes we don't know how much we're eating.
Yes.
So align that with what you said in the beginning, where most of the weight that you get from carbs is water weight.
Yeah.
Those two coming up, and water weight fluctuates. That's why my wife is always very jealous or envious of me that can lose 2-3 kilos in a couple of days. Where I keep telling her that all that is just water weight. It's not the actual weight. And
Yeah.
in 2-3 days, I can put that 2-3 kilos back on, depending on what I've been eating.
Yeah.
But that aligned with the previous thing is saying is that become more mindful of what you're actually taking in. A lot of times we look at a plate and we say, okay, this is just a little bit of food. But then you actually go and you look at the figures of that little bit of food that you're eating. And because of the added fats or the added this or the added that onto the plate, it adds up the calories.
Yeah.
And if you compare that to, say, just a plate of vegetables, the difference is huge. But the amount of food that you can eat for the same amount on the plate of vegetables compared to so let's call it fine dining here, because as a term, I'm also using the air quotes here, just because it's a small little amount of food, but it's very rich in calories.
Yeah, it's really, really rich in calories. Like a lot of the foods that make up a lot of ethnic cuisines that originate from, I would say, countries that have been through, hardships and stuff, tends to be very rich by nature. And that's a more reflection of the trials and tribulations that the country's been through, and the way the foods kind of have developed due to scarcity or certain aspects to that history of that place.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, I've never thought of it that way. But yeah, great.
Yep.
So I think that's the thing, and I think carbs get the bad rap for it. The way don't understand the actual amount of daily intake that they're taking. But
Yeah.
the go-to that we've been conditioned to is, oh, okay, carbs is the enemy, so I must cut out carbs. Not look at the total amount of calories that I'm actually taking in, but let's just remove carbs. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot of good nuggets that you've given throughout this particular podcast episode. And I would love to hear if anybody's like listening to this and they have any other further questions on the subject of carbs and how it can play a part. And I think the Spotify one actually gives you the option there that you can actually give some feedback on the episode. So it'll be great to hear. If you have a question there, you can just drop it in there.
That would be good, man. That would be so
Yeah,
fun.
we can always address that in future episodes. And if you found this useful, do share it with your friends. And also do follow us. We're primarily at the moment on Spotify. And so we would love if you would join us on this journey of fitness and weight loss, and give us a follow on Spotify. I don't Twin, you have any closing thoughts?
No, man, you summed it all up. Remember, carbs aren't the enemy. Carbs are your friend. Use them wisely, but don't overindulge on them. Yeah, and enjoy. Enjoy.
Enjoy. I think that's the part, right? Enjoy your eating, enjoy your lifestyle,
Yes.
and just do it in a portion controlled, mindful manner.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
We'll see you in the next one.
Ciao.